Hello and welcome to Data Conversations over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. I'm joined today by Dirk Jungnickel, who is at Emirates Group in Dubai and also a member of our global advisory board for the business of data. And someone, as I said in my LinkedIn post, was our first international speaker back in 2016 when we started CDO Africa. Dirk, how are you doing?
Thanks, Craig. Doing okay, doing fine. I mean, as good as it can be during the crisis and the pandemic. But in Dubai, it's actually relatively okay, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just talking off air there, sort of the vaccine rollout in the UAE, pretty advanced.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have taken great strides, in particular in Emirates now, but it goes across the whole country in the UAE. I think it's one of the leading countries in terms of vaccination penetration now. In the company, I think we have vaccinated more than 50% of staff, which is quite significant. It's across the group, actually. It's Emirates and Danata, plus a couple of subsidiaries. And focuses, of course, on frontline staff, flight attendants, pilots, people involved in customer handling at the airport. And of course, that is essential for us in order to also kind of regain trust of people to travel again, in particular in the airline.
Yeah, I mean, kind of almost the backbone of international travel is Emirates. So good to see it getting back on its feet. One of the things in South Africa, I mean, our vaccine rollout, a bit slower, but we're getting there. Done some really good work with our frontline healthcare workers and things like that. But I know some of the things that people are really looking at is really sort of the management of a vaccine database, you know, knowing who's got it, what the rollout plan is. What's that like in the UA? What are your sort of thoughts on that? Sort of really the control of the vaccination program that is not done and then sort of, oh, well, we don't really know who got done. And how's that all recorded?
No, that's actually done extremely well here in the UAE. It's one of the things, I mean, let's say the government has gone digital in many parts of its the administration. And in the UAE, everybody has an Emirates ID, which is something like an ID card, which is unique. And the Emirates ID is used to register also when you get a vaccination. So even if you don't have an appointment, some people have just walked into the vaccination centers, got vaccinated. Nothing works without the Emirates ID. And the second appointment then is also usually scheduled on time. So all of that is tracked. So the country has very, very good overview over who has been vaccinated already once, twice. So the numbers, I assume, are extremely reliable in this case. It's a little bit more difficult for us in Emirates because we have our own kind of vaccination program to make sure that our staff gets vaccinated quickly. And of course, some employees, I mean, the majority of employees will go through that program. So we're tracking as well. But then some people choose to go outside or have done this already before the company even started. And so we're lagging a little bit in terms of information, but it's a smaller fraction. The number which I quoted before is probably just the lower bound. Yeah. Presumably it's actually more employees that already have gone through full vaccination by now.
Yeah, I guess that's the important thing, is making sure it's all interlinked. You can kind of use that to sort of drive the growth back of the company. And that's really our main topic for today. And it's something that's come up regularly in the past, I'd say sort of 4 or 5 months. You know, I think the first sort of 4 or 5 months of this podcast was really about, you know, what's happening with COVID, you know, how are we going to sort of survive this? And now it's really about thriving and sort of, I guess, coming out the other side using data analytics to really drive that economic and business recovery at the same time. And I know this is something you want to just share your thoughts on. As we sort of said at the top of the call, I mean, Emirates is such a massive part of the global tourism industry, I guess the global economy as well, getting tourists and business people around. How are you guys really using data analytics to drive back that recovery of the business?
Yeah, I should probably start by mentioning the negative side of the pandemic when it comes to analytics. Of course, I mean, in the aviation industry, we were hit very, very hard by the economic fallout. Traffic has gone down significantly. I think globally it's around 50% of revenues. And in our case, it's even harsher because, I mean, our network is completely international. I mean, domestic travel was hit less hard than international travel. So the company, of course, had to react in order to stop the cash outflow, the bleeding, or hemorrhaging, you can say. And we had significant budget reductions, headcount reductions, and so on. So that went across the whole organization, which is quite natural in a situation like this. Well, having said that, at the same time, then, of course, very shortly after this happened, demand for analytics capabilities across the organization literally exploded, you can say. So we are in a perfect storm in the sense of having less money and having less people, but an explosion of many departments actually crying for help. It's probably important to put this into perspective, because I mean, Emirates as an airline has had a streak of, I think, 30 years of uninterrupted growth. So it was never very focused, I believe, on let's say on the last bit of optimization of the business here or there, which you very often for which you employ analytics capabilities. You need the relevant insights. Of course, there's analytics is applied across the business in order to design the network for pricing purposes and so on. But there are many operational processes where, with the help of analytics, of course, you can become more efficient. And this optimization is usually something that doesn't happen during growth times. The company grows for 30 years. There's a lot of potential for improvement in principle, which requires analytics. And that's exactly what's happening now, because everybody is under cost pressure. Everybody needs to become more efficient in the organization. And a lot of that is related to relatively simple, I would say, operational reporting requirements. People need to reconcile invoices, need to understand what's going on in the catering business. It's all over the business, more or less, that people want to all of a sudden are interested in numbers, in solid information in order to optimize their business. So that's one source of demand that where we have clearly seen significant growth. And then the other part is on the data science, machine learning, AI side, where we have built capabilities over the last 2 years, have built a cloud-based platform. We've built the tech stack there pretty much from scratch, I would say, over the last 2.5 years. And from the start, CI/CD enabled, so really applying machine learning ops from the start. So the capabilities are in principle there. The trouble now is that all the models that we have trained, or many of them, they need to be retrained. So customer behavior is changing, of course, dramatically. I mean, the network looks completely different. Can give examples. I mean, we have models for forecasting per flight the consumption of hot meals in the premium classes. Of course, all of that is trained on old data, and passenger behavior has changed. I mean, we have models to predict the credit default of travel agencies we are working with. And obviously they're defaulting now, but they're defaulting for completely different reasons, because people have stopped traveling. And so all of these kind of data science initiatives, which provide high value to the organization, a lot of them we had to stop either in operation or even before we could deploy things. And as you said, I mean, we need to now retrain models before we can actually launch them. And also the business, of course, is cautious and first wants to revalidate again. Is it actually working? Is it working better than a bunch of business rules which otherwise are being used? So that's another challenge that in many cases, it's like human learning in the end. Nobody really knows how the markets will evolve, how the networks will get reconfigured. We have a completely different business environment also, that traffic is, of course, driven still by passengers, but to a much larger extent now also by cargo demand. Just with a drop in international passenger travel, also cargo capacity has disappeared. So there's an enormous amount of cargo demand in the market. So the whole business model in the end, at least in the short term, has changed dramatically. So quite a challenge from an analytics point of view, I would say.
It's quite an interesting point around, people talk about the new normal, what would life look like after COVID, and what are sort of the travel habits of people after this? I mean, it's not something that, the company in its 30 years would have effectively gone through before. There's no sort of historical evidence to say that this is how people will slowly start to travel again. How are you sort of allowing for that? Are the models able to sort of really learn at a fairly rapid pace on their own to sort of see how things have changed, when people travel, why they travel, what they're willing to pay, etc.? It seems like something that's almost learning to walk again in a way.
Yeah, in a way it is. And I mean, in the reality is, of course, that it's anybody's guess at the moment how the market will recover, what will come first. I mean, most analysts seem to believe, and I would tend to believe the same thing, that there's quite a backlog in leisure travel, in personal travel.
Definitely, yeah.
People are actually desperate after the lockdown to get out and travel again, and that business travel will take a little bit longer to come back. And it's a question whether it will ever come back to the previous levels. These kind of things it's not so much a machine learning challenge, I would say. It's probably more, it's a business challenge to even forecast these things properly, and analytics can be of limited use in these kind of things because these are really macroeconomic trends, which are somewhat difficult to anticipate, I would say. I mean, I guess every airline at the moment on the globe is kind of waiting to see how things will come back. Is it domestic travel that they will pick up first? I mean, the indications were there so far. International travel is lagging behind. Business versus leisure travel, and then is it really the long distance stuff? I mean, there's quite a few things. People have learned to work from home now. I have quite a few friends in the management consulting space because I used to work there myself, and projects are being completely conducted remotely. I mean, even business development is happening remotely. I mean, these are frequent flyers usually traveling regionally, sometimes long distance, and how long it will take for this to recover and to rebound is an open question, I guess. So we will have to wait and see. But I mean, one thing is clear is that a lot of the machine learning solutions which have been trained on historical data will have to be retrained.
Yeah. And one of the trends that's coming up in my conversations already this year is really the use and sort of, I guess, blending integration of external data into the internal data as well. I assume an airline like yourselves makes use of a lot of external data, IATA and the like. Is that something that you see happening quite a lot now, is to make sure that you get up to speed quickly, that the insights are accurate, is bringing in a lot more external data, or are you already doing that anyway?
Yeah, no, we are doing that already. And of course, also there we have cost pressure, of course. I mean, external data costs money typically, but I mean, this is clearly one of the things we're doing. As a company, as an organization, we're actually processing external data, in particular regarding the indirect channel, where it's very difficult to obtain otherwise. And we have multiple data sources and try to get a good understanding how the market actually evolves over time now in this situation. So we're highly dependent on this kind of data. On top of that, of course, we have also learned how to incorporate global data on the pandemic. I mean, we need to understand, I mean, what's happening in which country regarding infection numbers. Of course, then the whole lockdown regulations, travel restrictions which are in place. So that's something which is being monitored very, very closely across the organization, but also by my team, because I mean these are essential drivers to understand what is really going on. Yeah,
I'm acutely aware of the travel restrictions. I think South Africa has been almost totally blocked from coming to the UAE at the moment because of our South African variants. If anybody's been here for in the last 14 days, you're not able to get into Dubai at the moment. So definitely impacted by that. Just sort of, I guess, on the theme of the external data, and this is not specific to you. This is general problem even with internal data. But how do you really, I guess, manage and assess the quality of that data? The integrity of it, the accuracy. So because you battle that internally anyway, now you're bringing in a whole bunch of external data. That's a lot of extra resource to go and make sure that data is correct. How do you manage that? And I think people outside of just the aviation industry will be interested to know how you go about doing that.
Yeah, that is indeed a challenge. I mean, in some cases, of course, we get external data that we can reconcile with our own internal data, and that is a source. That is at least one of the areas of consistency checks which we can apply and then basically evaluate. I mean, if data that relates to us is not entirely correct, and obviously you extrapolate from there also to other airlines. And then typically what also happens is that sometimes you see developments in data. I mean, significant shifts from indirect to direct sales and things like that. And then, of course, you cannot directly validate whether the data is correct, but at least you can link it to market events. I mean, if you have major airlines pushing, for instance, significantly sales towards their digital channels, you would expect this to be reflected in the data you get from external sources in the split between indirect and direct sales. And these kind of things we do. So we do consistency checks effectively, but otherwise, and then of course between different service providers or data providers we have, but it's limited what you can do. I mean, in the end, it's rudimentary consistency checks, I would say, that we can apply, but it's a challenge. Yeah.
All right, let's go back maybe to the fact that you said that the demand for analytics in the organization has really exploded through the course of the pandemic, and now especially as the business is starting to go out again, it's regrowth, revenues are going through, travel demands going up, and I think this is probably relevant to lots of people, because I've been speaking to people in banks and retail. Data analytics has just got over that hurdle of no one trusts it, we don't need it. All of a sudden it's in massive demand, like you say. What sort of, I guess, advice, or how do you go about sort of prioritizing, which projects to work on, which business units to help? Because I think people kind of get a little bit overwhelmed, like, oh, who are we going to help? How do you go and pick the right projects?
Yeah, that is indeed, that's a challenge, and it's something which we're currently actually discussing with our main stakeholders across the organization, because so far, until the crisis hit us, and even for the beginning of the crisis, I would say the prioritization was not that difficult, and could be done more or less without too much systematic discussion and prioritization frameworks. But this is something we are working on at the moment. I'd say on the data science side, we have a relatively good prioritization framework. Data science has the advantage that you can link what you do in many cases directly to, you can monetize the benefits more or less.
Yeah.
And you can compare this with the effort to have small business cases and then really prioritize based on that. Plus take in strategic direction from the company, which is a little bit more longer term. When it comes to reporting requirements, what I call classical BI, and that can be ad hoc reports where people just need some insight about certain areas or something.
Yeah.
So of course, it's very, very difficult to really get a solid feel for what's the monetary value. So we're actually setting up forums at the moment with our main stakeholders right now to discuss these kind of priorities, to make sure that this doesn't happen ad hoc.
Yeah.
And gets done systematically, gets aligned at least across the airline and also across the NATA, where we also work, in a more systematic way. Because I mean, in the end, I can't take that responsibility or accountability and say this is adds more value to the airline than that. It's not really my role. This is something that needs to be sorted out between the main business stakeholders in the end, who have P&L accountability for their respective areas. And it's sometimes difficult to judge whether, in particular on the reporting side, as I said, because they're quantifying the benefits, it has always been a challenge. If somebody tells me that a certain report goes to a meeting and people take better decisions, then what is it worth to take these better decisions, right? I mean, is it driving a couple of million dirhams in extra revenues, operational efficiency, or is it just something that people look at and say, great to see this, but otherwise doesn't have much of an impact? I mean, I can't really judge, and that is something which is a bit more tricky to compare. But this is at the moment, this is a topic exactly for that reason, because the demand outstrips delivery capacity significantly at the moment. So that has become a topic. Yeah.
Is it possible to run simulations around, sort of if then that type statements around, if you took this decision based on insights, this is effectively what could happen? Are you able to do that, sort of look forward using simulation, so that you do perhaps then know what the monetary value would be?
Yeah, you could in principle, but this is always very, very speculative. I mean, it's not nearly as solid as it would be in a data science case. I mean, if you support, let's say, campaign management for loyalty customers, for Skywards customers, you can immediately create a business case around this and quantify the monetary value of a certain campaign. Of course, it's a business case. You still have to measure it when you go into operation. You can try to do this, or the same goes for operational efficiency initiatives. When it comes to reporting and insight, I always found that very questionable. I mean, of course, people will come up with business cases and justify that millions or tens of millions of dirhams are at stake. But how solid and how reliable that really is, I mean, it's anybody's guess. I have always kind of tried to stay away from these kind of business cases, and because I mean, the uncertainty in this is so large that it becomes quite tricky to base prioritization on that. So I'm relying at the moment more on the collaboration between the different business areas. I mean, everybody's under cost pressure, and we have revenue pressure, of course, in the revenue generating functions. But I'm relying very much on the maturity of the stakeholders to kind of take the corporate view and say we understand that this is more important than that. And that's more or less the way in the direction which we're heading at the moment. And that seems to be working.
Yeah. And what's your feel towards, I mean, I assume now, I mean, Emirates is a fairly data-driven company. I think you've been driving that for the last couple of years that you've been there, but I would assume now it's a little bit more data-driven. The data-centric culture is even stronger. Well, let's call it an insights-driven organization, because we really need to be sure about the actions that we're taking to recover all parts of the business. Is it sustainable? Is it something that you see is going to be embedded in the organization, the fabric of the organization, the DNA, etc.? over the long term, this is it now. We
Mm.
are way more insights driven, or do you have a feeling, obviously you're going to try and make sure that this doesn't happen, that it kind of go back to the way it was?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, the way I look at it at the moment, you're absolutely right. I mean, Emirates has been a data-driven organization in the past. I mean, since I joined, I came here a little bit more than 2.5 years ago. And I can't complain about what you find in other organizations, that you actually have to promote data-driven decision-making strongly across the business. Of course, we had some challenges explaining what is data science, generate the necessary trust that models can actually predict certain things that experts used to do in the past. I mean, that is still going on, and you have to build that trust. But in general, I would say the organization has a very good understanding across most of the lines of business about the value of using analytics for better decision making. Mm. And let's say the adoption has now significantly increased during the crisis, because all of a sudden, as I elaborated on before, people start realizing they need information in order to basically manage their business more efficiently and more effectively. Whether this is sustainable is probably, that's a challenge for my team and me, because I treat this at the moment as a golden opportunity to really get this imprinted into the DNA of the company even stronger by actually demonstrating the value and delivering the value as being requested. And the way I also discussed it internally with my own team is it's a golden opportunity. It's something, I mean, in all the madness of the crisis at the moment, headcount reductions and budget pressure, analytics is all over the place. It's on everybody's agenda at the moment. In particular, customer analytics, improving customer experience, personalization is a huge topic right now. And it is a fantastic opportunity in the end to really drive now the capabilities through the organization by demonstrating that it works, that it can be done. And we have a lot of homework to do for that. I mean, I mentioned before that we are building our technology stack. On the data science side, we're pretty much done. But on the data management side, I mean, we're modernizing a lot. And in the midst of this kind of technology revamp, you can say, building a modern data and analytics platform, now the pressure kicks in to deliver very quickly with reduced resources. But on the other hand, through the right prioritization, picking the right initiatives, of course, it's our obligation almost, I would say, it's our accountability to utilize this opportunity which now unfolds in front of us.
Yeah. Now, I know that you've got, really strong executive sponsorship, and from a top down, data analytics is really pushed. But how are you sort of, I guess, promoting the value of analytics outside of the use cases and where you're demonstrating value at the time, so that everybody gets on board, that they, that sort of internal comms piece?
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one again. What we have done here over the past couple of years is actually we have a dedicated team. We call them adoption and enablement, that promotes the use of data and analytics across the organization. They have change management skills, training capabilities. They provide also handholding when it comes to the usage of tools or BI tools, for instance. Okay. And we run regular sessions. We have started now across the IT department, for instance, and we're expanding this now also into the business domain, to really talk about and educate people about what does it actually take to make better decisions based on analytics, because it always sounds really easy. People say, I mean, get me the data and I'll take better decisions. Of course, it doesn't work that way. I mean, if it was that easy, then you wouldn't need dedicated functions for this. And to bridge that gap in understanding, which still is a gap in many departments, we're running these kind of sessions to help people to understand this, educate them, provide handholding. And it's a dedicated team that we issue newsletters, we kind of launch webinars around these kind of topics. That is a significant exercise. Having said that, the value, of course, is very high, because it really gives the grassroots embedding of data-driven decision-making across the organization. It's not just the executive layer, of course, that needs to understand it. It's actually the community of business analysts in the organization that need to know they need to understand how to actually avoid the most important pitfalls in looking at information, looking at data, deriving insights from there, dealing with cognitive biases in their departments. So that's a kind of education which is quite critical, that we drive this. It is less important at the moment in order to generate demand for analytics support. As I mentioned before, I mean, we're drowning in demand. So it's actually it's even a little bit risky. on the data science side, the challenge is slightly different. I mean, we're also promoting this, we're trying to explain it in this way, but data science, what has worked very well in the past is to run dedicated, what we call ideation sessions with certain business functions where people are either very interested in the capability or where we suspect that there's a lot of potential benefit. We run sessions, basically full-day workshops with members of these departments to try to identify business opportunities. First of all, understand what are the day-to-day challenges, where data science potentially could help generate the ideas, which then go into a quick assessment into, I mean, is it actually feasible to do something with data science, with machine learning, AI, with an optimization algorithm or whatever it is? And do we have the relevant data? What's the quality of the data? Can it actually be done? Does it look promising? Then these things get prioritized and they become part of the backlog of the data science team. So there we take a little bit more of a proactive approach, generating the necessary demand, because it is for many business areas, it's not bread and butter. I mean, they're not familiar with this necessarily. They don't know what can be predicted in principle and what can't be. And sometimes it's a question of trust. Some people think it just can't be done, and then you have to convince them. And so you do small POCs or small pilots in order to do that. So it's a slightly different approach, but let's say the general capabilities of data science, of course, we're also promoting on more broadly through the organization, through the adoption and enablement team, which I mentioned earlier.
Okay, so that's sort of your route to data literacy, is having this dedicated team versus having as part of that is sort of a data university, a data academy, like Louise and Rich have, where people can actually do modules and courses, or is it sort of more in situ with the department that your adoption and enablement team goes to?
No, we have learning paths, and we actually at the moment we're getting them through the learning and talent and learning department in HR into the official learning path in the company, because it's quite important, of course, that the associated knowledge is not just limited to my team. I mean, it's a very, very federated organizational model that we have in mind for analytics in general. So we need the power users, the heavy users, and even data scientists across the business community. And we have these learning paths for them. So it's a relatively well worked out set of online courses. Some of the material we develop ourselves, and some of the material is actually online, which we have put together for people to kind of go through this, to reach also standardized levels of knowledge in the BI space, also in the data science space, and then remain embedded obviously in their business functions. Yeah. So it's maybe I mentioned that briefly, but I'm a big believer in centralizing data and the data management, the analytics platforms. That has to happen. There is no other way of doing it at enterprise scale. But the use of data, all the way to even building your own data science models and deploying them into production, is something that needs to be federated. So the more you can push that out into the business and the more self-service enablement is there, the better. And that, of course, makes it absolutely essential for us that we standardize the learning paths, have different, if you like, career levels for this. It's unofficial career levels, of course, in the business department so far. Yeah. But it's certification levels when it comes to the use of data analytics tools and capabilities. And that is something which is in place and is continuously developed and updated.
Okay, good. And Dirk, before I let you go, one of the things I've been asking everybody each episode are, what are the trends that you see in data analytics in 2021? What is your top 2 or 3 trends that you see? It could be internal, could be external, but what are you seeing as sort of, I guess, the outcomes of this pandemic with regards to data analytics?
Yeah, I think at least what I can observe internally, there's an enormous amount of pressure on anything related to automation. Also in our space, I mean, it's not just automation of business processes. The use of analytics is actually automating our own delivery cycles. Yeah. So everything that relates to what people call data ops and ML ops is a hot topic, very clearly. Yeah. Avoid the unnecessary overhead of regression testing, all kinds of things and so on. I mean, adoption of agile methodologies in some extent. I mean, we've done that transition for everything we're doing already a while ago, but there's quite a bit of refinement still to be done. Of course, there are developments in the, let's say, in the algorithmic space, in the more in the space of research or academic or sometimes corporate research on algorithms and so on. I mean, but I don't give that a lot of emphasis at the moment, because I mean, most companies struggle more with the adoption of relatively established capabilities in data science and machine learning. So for me, the focus is primarily, or the main trend is there on the automation front. Really get the life cycle of machine learning and AI solutions very much automated and under control, including the in-life management of models. And then the other part, which has been around for a couple of years, but also which creates a lot of traction, I think, also outside of our company, is the understandability, or turning the black box of machine learning into something like a gray box, really understanding and documenting the working of machine learning models, which of course can be done, is sometimes challenging, because I mean, there are quite a few use cases where businesses actually, or sometimes customers even, want to understand how's that score produced. And it's not a very good answer to tell them there is a black box with a complicated deep learning algorithm. I can't really tell you how the score is produced, but that's the outcome. So we need to provide that transparency of how models actually work. Yeah. That's an active area of research, and also in the domain of application, that is of course quite important.
All right, Dirk, it's been a very fast half an hour, but it's been great chatting to you. Yeah, thanks so much for the insights. It's been really good. I'm sure loads of people get value out of it, and hopefully they'll see Emirates back in the South African skies very soon. But it's been great to chat to you. I look forward to catching up soon.
We'll fly again soon. As soon as you let us in again, we'll be there.
Absolutely.